He was never merely the Prince of Darkness. He was pain made flesh, the raw scream of a generation lost. Ozzy Osbourne was not just a singer. He was rebellion incarnate, a man who clawed his way up from the depths of despair to build a chaotic empire, scarred yet miraculously alive. Now, as his final breath fades away, what remains is more than music. It is a legacy etched in blood, brilliance, and tears. At the time of his death, Ozzy's fortune exceeded $220 million. Payasador dest a Haninat Macrain Denans. Not inherited. Built through downfall and resurrection, through platinum albums, explosive tours, and raw confessions broadcast on television. Over 100 million albums were sold, each carrying a piece of his pain, each sustaining a stream of royalties that will echo long after he is gone. The homes he once lived in bear the mark of haunted opulence. A Gothic estate in Buckinghamshire with a hidden rehab wing, a penthouse at Sierra Towers where he once sought silence, and historic mansions in Beverly Hills where both triumph and sorrow were laid to rest. And his cars? Thunder cast in steel, an Audi R8, Ferrari 458, Rolls-Royce Phantom, machines of beauty and noise but inside, suffocatingly alone. But this was never about wealth. It was a testament that a shattered boy from Birmingham could carve his name into the peak of music history. In his final hours, Ozzy did not seek peace. He only wanted to know what he had left behind. And now, that question lingers in the void where he once stood. Who will carry that torch? Who is strong enough to lift the broken fragments of a soul that chose to burn rather than fade away? Before there was a legacy, before the chaos turned to gold, before Ozzy echoed through stadiums and generations, there was only silence. A silence thick as smoke, choking a frail boy named John Michael Osbourne, born in 1948 in the smog-stained slums of Aston, Birmingham. He didn't grow up with dreams. He grew up learning how to endure, one of 6 in a crumbling house where the cold bit deep and the wallpaper curled like old wounds. He found no softness. His father, ground down by factory shifts, believed affection made boys weak. His mother, worn thin by assembly lines, gave what she could, never enough. Not time, not comfort. He wasn't the clever one, wasn't the hope. He was the shadow in the corner, the boy who disappeared even when standing still. School offered no refuge. Dyslexia wasn't understood, only punished. Letters mocked, numbers blurred, teachers gave up, classmates didn't. They broke him with fists, silence, and words that cut deeper. At home, bruises met cold indifference. In that house, pain wasn't avoided, it was expected. So he carried it, wrapped it around himself like armor. But pain ignored doesn't fade, it hardens. By 14, silence had hollowed him out. One night, he stood in his room too long, not moving, barely breathing, willing the world to forget. But forgetting never came, only rage. He was pulled back into life by hands that feared weakness more than they feared death. Something inside him fractured or calcified. He stopped trying, drifted. At 15, he left school without skills, without voice. The world barely blinked. Jobs followed. Slaughterhouses, factories, building sites. But the noise in his head drowned everything. Every job ended in failure. Hunger came next. Cold nights, empty shoes, a belly louder than his voice ever was. At 17, desperation howled. He answered, with a burglary born from hunger, not greed. It landed him in Winson Green Prison, where hope didn't echo. It suffocated. One night, attacked by another inmate, Ozzy struck back, not out of strength, but fear. And still, in that cell of steel and silence, something stirred. A A prison radio crackled to life, spilling out the Beatles' "She Loves You." That song didn't just break the silence, it shattered it. Something ancient and aching awoke. Not ambition, need. A need to make sound, to be heard. That moment changed everything, he'd say later. I couldn't play, but I had to make noise. It wasn't yet success, but it was oxygen. It was purpose. And in that cell, the boy who once stood too still for too long made a vow. If the world wouldn't hear his pain, he would make it roar. If he couldn't outrun the darkness, he'd become it. That spark, small, ragged, defiant, became Ozzy. Not from fame, not from fortune, but from bone-deep agony. He didn't rise from the ashes. He was the ashes. And now that he is gone, only now does the world begin to grasp what it cost him to burn so long. Before the echoes of applause and walls of gold records, before he became a voice for the broken, there was a silence so suffocating it nearly erased him. Ozzy Osbourne had just left Winson Green Prison in 1965, a teenage ghost more empty than defiant. At 17, he wasn't seeking redemption. He didn't even believe he deserved it. He hadn't been lost. He'd been discarded. That 6-week sentence for a desperate, ill-planned robbery didn't reform him. It reinforced what life had been whispering all along. You are nothing. But then, through the crackle of a battered radio, the Beatles' "She Loves You" roared to life. Not a song, a resurrection. It was like God spoke to me, he later confessed. Not as a metaphor, but a memory of being pulled back from the void. That song didn't erase the bruises or undo the silence, but it offered something rarer. Purpose. He didn't dream of greatness. He dreamed of being loud enough to drown the shame. Music became the only language that spoke back. By 1968, his scream had shape. An ad brought him to 3 other haunted souls: Iommi, Butler, Ward. Earth was born, but it wasn't enough. Then came a name, like a curse. Black Sabbath. It wasn't music. It was exorcism. Their sound wasn't clean. It bled. Their debut, released on Friday the 13th, 1970, horrified critics. But it wasn't made for them. It was for the forgotten kids, the quiet rooms, the ones who never fit. And they listened. When Paranoid followed that same year, it wasn't polish they heard. It was pain that rhymed. Ozzy couldn't read music, but he read agony. He didn't sing in tune, but in truth. Every song was a wound reopened. And the world, for once, listened. But the louder it got, the lonelier he became. By the mid-70s, Sabbath soared, but Ozzy began to slip. Schedules drained him. Trust inside the band cracked. Then, without warning, they cut him loose. Not face to face, but through others. They didn't even tell me, he said, voice hollow. Sabbath wasn't just music, it was his anchor. Losing it felt like drowning in silence again. For days, he withdrew, questioning if anything of him remained. But silence never defined him. Even broken, he still burned. And from that loss, a solo legend emerged. One born, not from spotlight, but from the ashes of being cast out and choosing to scream anyway. But legends don't fade. They transform. In Ozzy Osbourne's bleakest hour, when silence nearly drowned him, Sharon Arden stepped in. She didn't just see the wreckage, she saw the ember still burning. Her words struck like thunder in drought. You were the magic in that band. You can do this without them. Then came Randy Rhoads, young and almost ethereal, whose guitar didn't just play, it wept, soared, and screamed with emotion. To Ozzy, Randy wasn't just a bandmate, he was salvation. Together they built Blizzard of Oz, 1980, not to prove triumph, but to survive. Crazy Train wasn't a hit. It was Ozzy's declaration that he still mattered. Being fired from Sabbath didn't destroy him. It stripped him to his core, revealing who he truly was. Randy brought clarity, beauty, and focus to the chaos. With Diary of a Madman, 1981, Ozzy reclaimed life, declaring his spirit unbroken. He called Randy a brother, the reason he didn't give up. On stage, they were lightning and rhythm. Off stage, they shared warmth, laughter, and a bond that felt fated. Ozzy remembered Randy's grace, as if he sensed time was running short. In March 1982, during a quiet tour stop in Florida, fate shattered everything. A joyride turned tragedy. A plane clipped their bus and crashed. Randy, only 25, was gone. Ozzy watched helplessly as fire consumed his friend. He collapsed, silent for days, unreachable. It wasn't just Randy in those flames, he later said. It was my hope. The loss silenced him. Even Sharon couldn't reach the grief. But from that silence, something fragile stirred. Ozzy began writing again, not to numb the pain, but to remember. Each lyric, each scream became a tribute, not to move on, but to carry forward. Ozzy performed not just for crowds, but for Randy. Every song was a vow. I won't let you be forgotten. And though sorrow never left him, it became part of his fire. A legacy forged not by fame alone, but by loss, by memory, by love. It was meant to be nothing more than a brief lift, a small loop in the sky to lighten the heaviness of the road ahead. Ozzy stood below, gaze fixed upward, a faint smile touching his lips, though behind his eyes a quiet dread stirred, an unexplainable shadow pressing cold against his chest. The plane circled once, then again, as if teasing time. But on the third turn, fate broke its silence. A wing clipped the band's bus, and in a heartbeat, the aircraft twisted, plunged, and met the earth in a firestorm that devoured everything. Randy Rhoads was gone, just 25, a blazing comet extinguished under daylight. Ozzy ran toward the flames, screaming Randy's name into smoke and ash, his voice cracking, disintegrating with every step. The fire wasn't just destruction, it was a funeral pyre for something sacred. He fell to the ground, trembling, stunned, broken by a truth too cruel to grasp. For hours, he lay there. For days, he said nothing. And for weeks, he wandered, through a fog where meaning vanished. I lost a part of myself that day, he later whispered. It wasn't just Randy's body in that fire. It was my hope, my music, my reason to keep breathing. The man once resurrected by brotherhood now found himself buried beneath a silence more brutal than any before. This fall wasn't dramatic. It was bottomless. Not even Sharon, his light, could reach him in that void. The tour halted. The laughter stopped. The house, once wild and alive, stood so still it felt like grief had taken root in the walls. Randy's death didn't just wound Ozzy, it hollowed him. And though time would one day pull at his soul to move again, something essential had been lost in that March fire, forever burned into the ground where a dream came crashing down. Some losses don't break you in half, they erase you from within. When Ozzy saw the sky devour Randy, it wasn't just his friend he lost, it was the last intact piece of himself. In the days that followed, he didn't hide, he vanished. Food lost its taste, words lost their meaning. He sank, not because he wanted to, but because there was nowhere else to go. When Randy died, something in me died too, he whispered later. I didn't want to be here, not in this world, not in this noise. It wasn't grief, it was emotional extinction. Sharon, once his anchor in chaos, could only watch from the shore as he drifted further into silence. The house, once roaring with sound, became a mausoleum. Even the walls seemed to mourn. And yet, in that cold, colorless void, a flicker returned, not of hope, but of memory. Ozzy picked up his pen not to write hits, but epitaphs. Every lyric was a resurrection, every growl into the mic a prayer. The pain never left, but he learned to sculpt it into song, not for applause, not for fame, but for Randy. Every note he sang was a rebellion against forgetting. Every spotlight was a promise. Your fire still burns in me. He walked back onto the stage a ghost with a pulse, not whole, but driven by something sacred. Ozzy Osbourne didn't perform to shine. He performed to remember. And in a world where pain so often silences, he chose instead to scream. You might imagine that after surviving such unbearable loss, after fire, grief, and the hollow ache of saying goodbye, some measure of peace would follow. But for Ozzy Osbourne, there was no peace, only descent. Grief didn't retreat. It rooted deeper, silent and suffocating. He didn't crash loudly. He eroded quietly. The man who once transformed torment into thunder now drowned in a numbness that no crowd could cure. Through the 1980s, he drifted, a haunted figure behind smeared eyeliner, a shell applauded by thousands, yet recognized by none. Tours blurred into oblivion, nights into voids. Sharon, his unwavering North Star, clung to hope with the tenacity of someone refusing to lose the man behind the myth. But love, no matter how fierce, cannot reach through walls someone has built inside themselves. I wasn't even in my own life, Ozzy would later whisper. I was just gone. By 1989, the fracture became a full collapse. Drowned in substances meant to numb but instead corroded, Ozzy reached a breaking point. One night, that August, in a haze too thick to see through, he crossed an unthinkable line. It wasn't rage. It was dissociation. And in that split moment, he turned on the only person still holding him up. Hands meant to hold had turned against love. It could have ended in something irreversible. But fate paused, just long enough. Sharon, shaken to her core, didn't respond with fear or fury. She responded with heartbreak. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, she later confessed. All I knew was I was looking at a man who no longer recognized me or himself. He wasn't taken away in disgrace, but in surrender, into a facility far from cameras and cheers, where no myth could shield him. Inside those walls, Ozzy met his reflection stripped of legend. Just a man, a stranger even to his children, a voice he could no longer find within himself. What scares you most? A counselor asked one day. That she'll leave, he replied instantly, his voice brittle. That I've pushed too far this time. But Sharon stayed. Not because it was easy, but because she believed in the flicker still buried beneath the ruin. I know you're still in there, she said, not as comfort, but as challenge. Rehab wasn't redemption. It was resistance, a brutal war to claw back the pieces of himself. And when he finally walked out, he wasn't reborn. But he was different, scarred, softer, eyes a little clearer, carrying every broken moment like a talisman. Reflecting years later, he said, "That's when I knew. I couldn't keep falling and calling it flight." And that quiet reckoning became the axis on which his survival turned. Not a comeback, a resurrection. And now, in the shadow of his death, his legacy doesn't just echo in music. It lives in the brutal, beautiful truth that even the loudest legends sometimes whisper their way back from the edge. After the storm, no calm came, only a silence so thick it felt like drowning in sorrow, a stillness not born of peace, but of loss. Ozzy Osbourne, once the roaring storm of heavy metal, now stood stripped of his persona, alone with a wreckage of a life too broken to recognize. After that night, in 1989, a night that didn't just fracture his world, but nearly ended the life of the only person still reaching for him, he wasn't cuffed, but quietly taken to a psychiatric hospital. Not as a criminal, but as a man on the verge of disappearing forever. Behind its walls, there was no spotlight, no stage, just sterile white silence and his own hollow reflection. Ozzy, who once shattered arenas with a scream, now sat in corners, too quiet to hide in, whispering apologies only he could hear. Days passed in numb surrender. He barely spoke. He barely moved. He barely existed. Sharon, scarred yet steadfast, stood outside that place, not out of obligation, but belief. There's still something left in him, she told herself, just enough to fight for. And inside, amid the fog of detox and regret, Ozzy met the one enemy he could never outdrink or outsing, himself. Recovery wasn't a comeback. It was war. Every morning was a battlefield of ghosts, of sweat, of fear. Every hour stripped him down, tearing away the layers of madness he had worn like armor. He didn't run. He stayed. He clawed through the noise to reclaim his breath. When he emerged, it wasn't with victory. It was with awareness. In 1990, he didn't return to fame. He returned to himself. Reuniting with Zakk Wylde, Ozzy channeled everything into the making of No More Tears. When it dropped in 1991, it wasn't just an album. It was a reckoning, a confession, a prayer carved from the bones of the man who almost didn't make it. Songs like Mama, I'm Coming Home, and Road to Nowhere were more than tracks. They were open wounds stitched into melody. It was me learning to be human again, Ozzy later said, not in triumph, but in trembling truth. Fans, once certain he'd faded into myth, saw not just their icon return, but a man built back from ashes. Yet the war never truly ended. Every sober sunrise was a small rebellion, every stage a scream against the whisper that once told him to surrender. And Sharon, his anchor, his witness, never wavered. She saved me, he said, every day, every damn day. Their marriage wasn't fairy tale. It was forged in fire, tested, torn, rebuilt, but it held. Through the early 90s, Ozzy moved like time owed him no favors. He toured without pause, threw his soul into music, as if trying to outrun the darkness still nipping at his heels. Even retirement in '92 was temporary. The call of the crowd too loud, the ache too deep to silence. The stage remained his sanctuary. Not for ego, but survival. Each show was a heartbeat. Each note, a breath. Each scream, a refusal to fade. In reflection, he once admitted, I never thought I'd live this long. Every day is borrowed time. And he made it count. Not in flawless headlines, but in fierce persistence. Through chaos and calm, he carved out more than wealth. He left behind endurance in its rawest form. Ozzy Osbourne, the man who once stared into the abyss and almost slipped, had chosen, again and again, to stand. The darkness stayed, but so did his fire. And in that defiant balance, he left behind more than music. He left a lesson. Survival isn't a moment. It's a vow. A fire whispered through time by those too stubborn to vanish. Time, the one enemy no scream could silence, came not with fury, but with quiet erosion. As Ozzy Osbourne entered the 2000s, the chaos had quieted, but the toll had begun. He wasn't dodging scandal or drowning in headlines. He was simply aging, one weary step at a time. The Osbournes may have introduced him to living rooms as a bemused, stumbling father figure, But behind the awkward charm was a man increasingly at war with his own body. Years of rebellion had left their mark on his joints, his bones, his breath. Then, in December 2003, the quiet nearly became permanent. A quad bike ride, meant as a harmless afternoon break, turned catastrophic. The crash left him barely alive. Collarbone shattered, ribs broken, a vertebra crushed, lungs collapsed. Machines kept him breathing. For 8 days, the Prince of Darkness lay wordless, unconscious, on the edge of a silence deeper than any he had ever sung into. Sharon gripped his hand like a lifeline, whispering strength as doctors whispered doubts. "I didn't know if he'd come back," she would say. But somehow, Ozzy did. His recovery wasn't glorious. It was grim. Each breath a struggle, each step a dare. There were no guarantees, not for music, not even for movement. But with every painful inch forward, he defied them. And just months later, at the 2004 Brit Awards, he stepped onto that stage. Not triumphant, but undefeated. The applause that followed wasn't for performance. It was for endurance, for breath reclaimed, for life rewritten. Yet the damage remained. The pain never left. It simply became another companion. "It hurts," Ozzy admitted, "but I'm here." And that, in itself, was everything. In this chapter, strength wasn't fire. It was embers, kept alive by will alone. Ozzy Osbourne, no longer the unbreakable god of metal, had become something rarer. A man who refused to fade, even when everything in him begged for rest. He didn't roar, he endured. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes survival isn't about rising. It's about refusing to fall. Just when the wreckage of a lifetime seemed to settle into a fragile stillness, when Ozzy Osbourne had finally earned the quiet after decades of storm, fate arrived not with fury, but with a silence so sharp it cut deeper than chaos ever could. One misstep in the calm of his own home, and time, merciless and unrelenting, reached back to tear open what it had once broken. The rods in his spine, implanted to hold him together since 2003, ripped apart as if history itself refused to let him rest. It wasn't a fall, it was a reckoning. It was pain beyond anything I've ever felt, he confessed later, not as an icon, but as a man unraveling. But fate wasn't done with him yet. As he lay fractured, battered, came the whisper of something even crueler. Parkinson's. Not a roar, a quiet thief. It didn't break him overnight. It unstitched him slowly, deliberately, erasing strength, balance, freedom. The man who once roared like a tempest now struggled to stand. And when he finally spoke of it, there was no defiance left in his voice, only truth. "I'm just wobbling," he said, not for sympathy, but because the lie cost too much to maintain. For once, Ozzy didn't shock the world, he hushed it. This wasn't tragedy played loud, this was slow, sacred suffering. And still, through the erosion, he chose to create. In 2020, he gave us Ordinary Man, an album that felt less like a comeback and more like a confession, a love letter written to time itself. His voice, cracked but burning, didn't beg for memory. It demanded it. "I still matter," it cried. And we listened, not as fans, but as witnesses. Because that was the true legacy. Not just survival, but defiant significance. Every staggered step, every strained lyric, every breath stolen from the jaws of silence became a monument to refusal. He wouldn't go quietly. He wouldn't disappear. And in his final years, stripped of title, stripped of myth, he became something rarer than any rock god. He became real. Not the Prince of Darkness, but the proof that even when the body collapses, the spirit can still scream. When he finally surrendered to the weight, the silence didn't win. What he left behind is not gold, not mansions, but something heavier, something holier, the sound of a soul that refused to be erased. And in that sound, he still lives. He was no longer bathed in stage light, but shadowed by something far more unforgiving, time itself. At 76, the darkness surrounding Ozzy Osbourne wasn't theatrical. It was quiet, creeping, irreversible. Parkinson's had grown relentless, reshaping his final years into a slow war against his own body. The voice that once split stadiums had withered to a hush. Hands betrayed him without warning, and legs, once defiant, now stumbled without reason. Each morning brought a reckoning. Some days, he stared into the mirror and saw a stranger. But even in that fading reflection, the fight never left him. "I'm still fighting. I'm not done yet," he insisted. Not as a rock god, but as a man who refused to vanish. His world shrank, not to irrelevance, but to discipline. Rehab schedules replaced rehearsals. Monitors replaced amplifiers. Yet even as the walls closed in, Ozzy found new rituals of resilience. Sharon, ever the storm beside his silence, stood unshaken, transforming their home into a place where dignity could live alongside decline. Railings replaced bravado. Ramps stood where stairs once dared. Still, there were moments. He'd slip on headphones, let memory pulse through melodies, sometimes shuffle into his home studio, not to create, but to remember. His body weakened, but his wit remained, a sharp flicker of the wild man he once was. When speaking of death, he chuckled darkly. "It's just the next tour, without the sound check." That was Ozzy, raw, unscripted, unforgettable to the very end. Behind that bravado, though, was peace, not surrender, but sovereignty. The curtain fell not in chaos, but in choice. His legacy was never just about music. It was about defiance, about a soul that rose every time it fell. And though the voice is quiet now, its echo remains, etched not in gold records, but in the bones of those who once found strength in his scream. Because true legends don't vanish. They haunt, they heal, they echo forever. Even as the echoes of his final battles still lingered in the air, July 5th, 2025 arrived not as another date in Ozzy Osbourne's storied calendar, but as a hushed crescendo to a life lived at maximum volume. On that day, supported by the original members of Black Sabbath, he stepped onto the sacred soil of Birmingham, the birthplace of it all. They named it Back to the Beginning, yet to everyone there, and to the nearly 6 million watching from around the globe, it felt like a curtain call written in bone-deep fire. More than 40,000 fans filled the stadium, but what swept over them wasn't applause. It was reverence. When Ozzy emerged, slow and deliberate, leaning on a cane, with Sharon by his side, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. There were no theatrics, no pyrotechnics, just presence, just goodbye. His voice, roughened by time, yet still echoing with the remnants of his old fury, reached for that first note. And in that moment, history folded in on itself. Songs once built for rebellion now sounded like blessings, every lyric weighed with the gravity of legacy. At one point, he murmured, "This is it," and thousands of hearts cracked open in unison. Later, he confirmed it. "This may well be the last time I ever stand on a stage. Not with sorrow, but with a stillness that can only come from a man who has touched every shadow and chosen light anyway." That night didn't fall like a finale, it descended like grace. But true to Ozzy's essence, this chapter wasn't about spectacle, it was about service. Every penny of the $190 million raised that evening was donated Not for show, but for soul, to Parkinson's research, to a children's hospital in Birmingham, and to a hospice where young warriors fight in silence. It wasn't charity, it was legacy in action. In his final stretch, with stages behind him and no more lights to chase, Ozzy found resonance in the quiet. On the Osbournes podcast, he and Sharon weren't celebrities. They were survivors, opening their hearts about love, loss, and the toll of endurance. When the mics clicked off, his sanctuary became the garden where his grandchildren circled him like sunlight and the world's noise fell away. He didn't perform anymore. He passed on wisdom. Not the kind forged in glory, but the kind earned through ashes. His stories were softer now, but no less powerful, because they weren't about chaos. They were about choosing to stay. And when July 22nd came, it wasn't an ending. Ozzy didn't disappear. He became something softer, but no less eternal. An echo, a rhythm in the silence, a presence in the pause. Because legends like Ozzy Osbourne don't fade, they deepen. They leave behind more than records or rebellion. They leave behind reminders that even in the fall, there is grace. And in silence, there is always a song. At the twilight of his journey, where crowds once roared, now only wind whispered through garden leaves and the laughter of grandchildren echoed like lullabies, Ozzy Osbourne found himself no longer cloaked in fame's fury, but wrapped in something gentler and far more enduring. Legacy. Not etched in gold records or tabloid ink, but in the quiet strength of the children who carried his fire forward. Amy, his firstborn, walked away from the glare of celebrity to build a sound as haunted and beautiful as solitude itself. Kelly, fierce and unfiltered, wore resilience like armor, her father's spirit reborn in style, voice, and fearless heart. Jack, once chaos incarnate, became a steady compass, documenting truth, standing sentinel through the hospital corridors, never letting go. From his first union with Thelma came Jessica and Louis, figures of silence, not absence, whose distance never diminished their place in his heart. These weren't perfect bonds, but they were real, forged through trial and tempered in time. In the hush of Ozzy's final years, it wasn't the world that held his story. It was them. They were his keepers, not of myth, but of the man behind it. Yet perhaps the final verse of Ozzy Osbourne's life wasn't strummed from guitars. It was penned with intent, signed with memory. With over $220 million to his name, he crafted not a monument of wealth, but a blueprint of giving. In 2024, mind sharp though body failing, he finalized his will, not from fear, but clarity. Sharon and all 5 children stood as rightful heirs, but the legacy stretched wider. Endowments flowed to mental health support, struggling musicians, and youth who chased dreams in garage bands and secondhand stores. Animal rescues received a pledge born of Ozzy's quiet affection for dogs, the only loyalty he never had to question. And folded within the legal pages was a handwritten letter, his truest lyric, thanking the causes that patched his soul and promising his royalties would fuel their mission long after he was gone. It was a final bow made not of sound, but of grace. After his second solo Rock Hall induction in 2024, murals bloomed, songs resurfaced in subways and schools, and the world finally saw Ozzy wasn't just an icon, he was an emblem of resilience. So when the world lost him on July 22, 2025, they didn't just grieve a rock star, they wept for a kindred spirit in chaos. Candles lit windowsills, stories spilled like prayers, albums played like confessions. Across every age and language, one truth sang loudest. Ozzy wasn't madness, he was meaning. And though the amps are off and the stage lies still, the echo he carved in rage, love, and undying defiance will never fade. Rest, Ozzy. The light has found you, the storm has passed, and what you've left behind isn't noise. It's hope.